Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Before I start, I must say that I'm deeply honored to be part of this very memorable event. And also we are of rather similar age, your husband and me. We did not actually meet in the world of movement disorders. I'm very much impressed to see his contributions and to have learned in the last couple of hours how far his roots have reached out into the movement disorder world, not only here in South India or in India as a whole, but also internationally. So the fact that we never personally have met is teaching us that in the meantime, the world of movement disorders has so much expanded that it's a huge community. And in my case, it was so that the movement disorder world has developed more or less into two main fields. That's the Parkinsonian world, you know, that's Dr. Muthane's world, and the world of non-Parkinsonian movement disorders, dystonia, tremor, all the other more rare movement disorders. That's more my world. And so it was only natural that having worked and working in the different hemispheres of movement disorders, we never had the opportunity to meet personally. Yeah, when I was asked to give this presentation here, I thought on this occasion like this, it's not appropriate to give you a typical standard kind of presentations with all the slides and all the gimmicks and all the, you know, scientific overlay. So my idea was for today really take you on a journey first of all through the history of botulinum toxin. And this journey of botulinum toxin, starting some 40 years ago and many more years to come, has also been pretty much a personal journey for me. And so in that respect, I would like to start with my presentation, and we just move to the first slide. As many great ideas, they don't fall from heaven. They have people behind, individual people, singular people, geniuses. And in that case here of the botulinum toxin therapy, it was Dr. Alan B. Scott, an ophthalmology. I got to learn over the years very closely. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. And he had that idea as an ophthalmology. He was interested in strabology to avoid invasive operations on small children with strabismus by chemically manipulating the tension of the extraocular eye muscles. The idea was very straightforward, was very logical, but the reality was very complicated because he was looking for many, many years, and he told me all the stories, what different compounds and agents he was trying to achieve this. Finally, after many years of search, he ended up with a very strange substance, which was botulinum toxin. The reason he told me that he ended up with botulinum toxin was that he was in touch with a physiologist, David Trachman from the US, who had published in the 1950s already that botulinum toxin can be used for physiological experiments in chicken muscle at that time. And what he was describing there, that it was a reversible paresis he could induce, a paresis that was not toxic and not necrotizing for the target tissue. And then Alan said, that could be exactly the substance I was be looking for. Yeah, I mean, then he had that general idea, but then came reality again. You know, how can you set this idea into reality? You know, it's unbelievable how many steps you have to to do and how many borders you have to cross before you can really therapeutically use this substance. And he did all that work, and he did some monkey work, and he did some experiments in the lab about the toxicity and how to handle the substance and all of that. And for that he needed a collaborator in microbiology. You know, the substance is as we learned today, is a biological substance, a large protein, and still today it has to be produced from bacteria, from Clostridium bacterium. And so he found that collaborator in Edward Chance. And Edward Chance was the person who helped Alan Scott to actually formalize that substance, so that incredibly highly toxic substance, so that it could be safely used, predictably used in a clinical scenario. Eric Johnson was also in that lab at that time, so he then took on later on developing botulinum toxin as a therapeutic agent, and so he's also, together with Ed Chance, one of the godfathers of botulinum toxin therapy, and I have to mention his name as well. Yeah, so then it was in the late 1970s, 1976 or so, and Aaron shared the photos with me. He had first injected the substance in a human being, in a patient. That was a patient with abducens paresis. He had a squint, she had a squint at that time, and he put it in the contralateral external eye muscle, and by, paralyzing that antagonistic muscle, the squint got normalized, and the patient could look straight and wouldn't have double vision anymore. And by the time the toxin was fading away, after months, 3-4 months, the other diseased muscle, recovered, and the patient had a normal vision again afterwards, normal gaze afterwards. So that was the crucial initial experiment that was performed, and that was encouraging Alan to carry on with his work, and then he translated that into applying the substance for strabismus in children. And interestingly, when we look backwards now, that indication of strabismus never really took off as much as everybody had hoped it. There are other methods still, and so the big breakthrough did not occur in strabismus, but it occurred in other conditions, and we will cover that later on. So he was working in San Francisco, and he was in touch with Stanley Farn. You just heard the name before, Stanley Farn, one of the towering figures in movement disorders at that time and for many decades afterwards. He was working in New York at Columbia, and so he, together with Alan, he developed the idea saying, okay, if there is something that can modulate muscles for a prolonged period of time in a very safe way, why not, as an ophthalmologist, considering blepharospasm? It's a relatively common condition. Why not injecting it in the orbicularis oculi muscle to calm down the overactivity of that muscle in the context of blepharospasm? So, and then Stanley Farn and David Marston, he told me the story. They were sitting together somewhere in the world at one of the big congresses, and at 12 o'clock at night at the bar, they were brainstorming and chatting around and everything. And then, David Marston got involved, and then out of this, so to say, informal contact, the idea had shifted into neurology. Stanley Farn, David Marston, towering figures, movement disorders in neurology. So then it was clear that on both sides of the Atlantic, and that's why I was alluding here to the two continents. The botulinum toxin development took simultaneously and synchronicity place on both sides of the Atlantic, as much in America as in England, in Europe. The Americans tend to forget that, but that's quite natural for them. But the, second memory, especially when it comes to history, I must say. Okay, and then from blepharospasm, there is hemifacial spasm, a quite similar condition. That was where the first studies that were published in 1984, 1985. And then, of course, once that, and I will explain that interesting connection with the next slide, the toxin had reached not only neurology, but the field of dystonia. What are very common dystonic conditions? Blepharospasm, yes. The next very common condition is cervical dystonia. So then it was natural that people said if it works in dystonia in blepharospasm, it might also work in cervical dystonia. So why not doing the same? And then very short afterwards, 1967, 87, 89, there were the first reports that patients with cervical dystonia were also receiving botulinum toxin therapy. Yeah, trying to give you a historical overview, and I need to mention this thing because I think it's absolutely extremely important. With botulinum toxin, it was not only a completely novel therapy inaugurated, it was also had tremendous effects on dystonia. There would not have been any development in dystonia if there would not have been botulinum toxin to treat it. It was really the years I was in London at that time, 87, 86, 87. Dystonia was an unheard of condition, more or less. There was the misconception that dystonia is a rare disease. The reason for that was you didn't have a treatment. If you don't have a treatment, patients are not coming to see you. And if you don't have patients to be treated, then everybody says it's a rare condition. I remember very well when I was young in London, somebody said, a senior doctor, senior neurologist at Queen's College said, yeah, young man, it's great that you're interested in dystonia, but what are your estimates? How many patients will you be seeing during your career? 5, 10? I mean, there are thousands now, but at that time, that was not recognized. So really, I want to point out that the development of the botulinum toxin therapy went absolutely in parallel and as a necessity in parallel in the development of dystonia as well. So the right drug at the right time, there was this close interaction between botulinum toxin and dystonia, and that's really the reason why I was ending up in this area, because it was natural. When you do botulinum toxin, you do dystonia. When you do dystonia, you cannot avoid to think about botulinum toxin. And those, in a way, were the great years. We had just been discussing about the great times neurology and movement disorders had in the late 1960s when levodopa came up. Levodopa revolutionized the other hemisphere of the movement disorder world, the Parkinson's world, and botulinum toxin revolutionized the world of dystonia and other non-Parkinsonian movement disorders. And interestingly, and we saw that this afternoon at this meeting, very much at the same time, 87, the idea of deep brain stimulation occurred first in Parkinson's, but soon later in dystonia as well. So we had a period of time in movement disorders in these years, second half of the 80s, first half of the 1990s, when there was really a revolution going on. We had botulinum toxin, we had the development of the dystonia concept, and we had the introduction of deep brain stimulation. Of both, depending, sometimes you have lots of different difficulties to distinguish spasticity from dystonia, and so it was logical that the movement was reaching spasticity. And cerebral palsy sounds like a different condition. In fact, my perception is that cerebral palsy is a kind of spasticity in young patients, like in kids. So it was natural that after spasticity in adults, cerebral palsy in kids became the target for botulinum toxin. And then things moved a little bit further away. You know, they moved to actually autonomically innervated muscles in the bladder, which is a pretty robust indication these days as well. Having said so that toxin had at some point reached the autonomic nervous system, there was really a major change in direction when other autonomic indications were targeted. And that was hyperhidrosis, hypersalivation, hyperlacrimation. So as we heard today, the basic mechanism of botulinum toxin is interruption of the neural transmission, the cholinergic neurotransmission, and it does not only take place in neuromuscular synapses, but it also takes place in autonomic synapses. So predictably, it was clear that you should be able to use botulinum toxin also in autonomic conditions, and so they were really relatively early described in the form of hyperhidrosis and later hypersalivation. So if you want, you know, here we are in the world of autonomic diseases. You have the autonomic lab here in Bangalore, so you see how the circuits are formed in this world. Then many years later, the interesting thing happened. Things have moved to a new area of indication, which is pain. And the first indication that was developed there was chronic migraine. How did that happen? What was the history about that? You know, and again, it was really, it has never been any, you know, big plan of big pharma, big research program, big government money or anything. Really, 99% of botulinum toxin came really out of the world of people who used it. People like you here in the audience with an interest in the substance, with many patients, and you watch the patient, you make your observations, and you think in the evening, what have you done during the day? So how did it happen in chronic migraine? There were patients with blepharospasm. They were treated for blepharospasm. They received their injections in the forehead. They received them around the eye. And it happened to me that, you know, you treat these patients after a year or so, 1.5 years. Patient got back and said, "Doctor, by the way, I come here, you know, every 3 months for these blepharospasm injections. By the way, just to let you know, my migraine has gone." That was the starting point why people moved their interest there with botulinum in the field of chronic migraine. Then, you know, the injection scheme changed a little bit, but it was all trial and error. But the starting point was an observation from people out there in the field, receiving the information back from the patients they had been treating before. Yeah, so that is now covering most of the indications we have at the moment, at least in the medical field. You know, you may have heard, or some of you may have actually heard of botulinum first time out of the therapeutic area. You have heard it as an aesthetic substance, as an anti-wrinkle drug. That is now about 50% of the global, you know, medical production of botulinum toxin goes into aesthetic applications, glabellar lines, epicanthal lines, all these facial lines you can treat. Again, that refers to muscular effects. If the scars, if the facial lines are caused by mechanical irritation or so, then it's not working. But if there is an underlying muscle hyperactivity, botulinum toxin is a way to treat this. And again, by the way, don't want to wither away and, you know, don't want to disturb your dinner tonight, but the aesthetic indication was exactly developed in the same way like the migraine indication. There were patients being treated for blepharospasm, and they came back and said, "Well, doctor, I look so young now. what's the cause, and if you then as a doctor said, oh, okay, the folds are gone, facial lines are gone, then you have, detected and discovered the massive indication of aesthetic use of botulinum toxin in the field of aesthetics. What's next? Of course, difficult to predict the future, as always. I could imagine that there is a lot of interesting indications waiting for us in the field of pain, non-migraine pain. We have a lot of individual observations, small case series in stump pain, neuropathic pain, all kinds of post-herpetic pain, strange, very difficult to treat conditions, and then there are a lot of reports that toxin maybe work. What's missing there, of course, is a concept. Starting even with the pathophysiology of these pain conditions, we don't really know what it is. We have so far not an idea how to bring the mode of action of toxin together with the pathophysiology of these conditions. But I could imagine that that is something, if there is more observations collected, concepts will emerge, and then therapies might be developed. Depression is an open field, very far away from what we have been doing so far. It's very hypothetical, question mark. I couldn't predict whether that's really an option, so we had published on that. Yeah, of course, we have now an established product, long history, many indications, $6-8 billion global market annually. Anything new in pharmacology? What's the pharmaceutical industry doing? Are they doing their homework? Do they contribute to the progress, to the future of toxin? I must say, not very much. There are various toxin types, various toxin subtypes. There are experiments whether they have differential effects, whether you could use them specifically therapeutically. There is the question, we have a toxin that's lasting 3 months roughly. Can you prolong the effect, making it more user-friendly if you only come once a year? I must say there are no good concepts to improve the duration of effect. The claim that one of the recent manufacturers made that they had achieved the longer-lasting drug is void, it's fake. There are no scientific data supporting that claim. It's a marketing claim. Companies at the moment punished for that. Stock prices are rock bottom. Whether you need it, how much you need it, I personally think if you have a severe condition like dystonia, severe spasticity, your patients are happy to see you every 3-4 times a year. So there are lots of things we discussed during these office visits. It's part of the whole concept of treating these chronic patients. So I think they like to come in these rhythms. Yeah, if it would be maybe half a year, maybe that could be an improvement for the future. Of course, there are gimmicks, in aesthetics. Can you develop special application devices? Can you produce it as a cream? I don't think that is really by any means relevant for therapeutics, maybe except for hyperhidrosis treatment. When you talk to the industry and they have their forums, Toxin Association, taken over by the industry, they keep telling you every day, every time, we have all these full pipelines, wait for the future. Believe me, that's marketing gimmick. I don't think that we will have much pharmaceutical progress in that field. We have, interestingly, a very robust, very reliable, excellent drug. There is not much need, to improve things there. Versatile principle, that is something that's very far ahead, and many years ago, actually, people said, we have this interesting molecule, you have the heavy chain, the light chain. The light chain is a protease with an intracellular effect on snare proteins, so that substance, part of the toxin, could be used to modulate various excretion process, intracellular excretion processes, and at the same time you have the heavy chain a targeting molecule, targeting certain surface proteins in the body. So maybe we could separate the toxin into two sides. The intracellular mechanism, we could be using that for maybe some theoretical considerations, and we could use the heavy chain as a targeting instrument. The idea has been out for the last 15, 20 years. Not a single company managed to come up with a more concrete idea how to use this versatile principle therapeutically for the futures. Yeah, so what about the markets? And that will be important, I think, especially here for India. Of course, we have aesthetics, 50% of the market, huge profits, big markets. That is 50% of the botulinum toxin world. But there is the rest of it, that's therapeutics. It's dominated still by Allergan for historical reasons, and 2, 3 other major international brands, Dysport and Xeomin out of Germany. The Chinese have a well-established domestic product with not much of an international presence. And recently the Koreans have arrived. There are 22 or so companies manufacturing botulinum toxin out of Korea, but that is almost entirely in aesthetics. You have a lot of locals. Even Iran is producing its own toxin. Brazil is working on this. Russia has it, and so on. So there are a lot of local attempts to produce a therapeutic substance or a substance mainly for aesthetic use. A big thing that is probably going to revolutionize the international markets is the introduction of biosimilars. In the Western world, the applications are controlled by the registration authorities, and a major step to market access are not IP and patents. Major access is really through registrations, and biosimilars are a way with the FDA, with the European authorities to get market access. And if a company manages to manufacture a biosimilars to Allergan, all the 17 Allergan indications, therapeutic indications, including the aesthetic indications, fall into that company. If that would happen, it would be a revolution for the markets. It's a pending revolution. Brings me to the last point tonight, the future markets. What we have been seeing is we have seen how the substance has developed in the different indications in the different medical fields. What we also have seen that the toxin has reached out from the Western world into other markets, luckily enough, Asian markets, India. And I think what the challenge now is not developing new substances, developing new business models that allow us to bring the toxin therapeutically to all the patients in need. So, and the basis for that is the magic formula, as I would call it, price versus volume, price multiplied by volume. At the moment, sky-high prices, low volumes of sale, few people get access. You know, who can pay $500 for a 100-unit vial? If you bring the price down, you can increase the volume. And if companies managed to reduce their prices and increase the volume, the benefit would go to the population, to the patients who would need this. And I think personally that is a big challenge now to start to change the business models for the toxin so that it goes away from an exclusive product for a few million people in the Western world, so that it can reach out to all patients in need throughout this universe. Do we play a role in this as physicians? Yes, we do. We definitely have a role for this. We have to make that happen. We have to challenge the companies. We have to make sure that we get reasonable prices so that we can expand the patient base. So that is really the role for us. And in that respect, I would ask you to join in. Let's work together on this mission, and let's start this mission right now, today. And so hoping that we can really bring botulinum toxin therapy to all patients that would need it. Thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening talk. I'd like to request Professor Satish Chandra, Professor Srinivas, Professor Muthane, and Professor Pal to please felicitate, sir.
For you.